Hi, I'm Andy Jones, Content Editor for Plaid's online education program, Let's Paint. And I'd like to welcome you to our Friday YouTube Live. And we are going to continue our discussion of how to use artist brushes today, focusing primarily on the liner brush. So I am joined in studio today by Stephen White, who will be moderating and sharing your questions and comments with me. So welcome, Stephen. We're glad to have you here.
Yeah, appreciate it. I'm happy to be here as well.
Okay, so it's a Friday and we're going to talk about a liner brush, and I couldn't think of things more opposite. Friday weekend, everything's great. Mention using a liner brush and everyone's eyes roll to the back of their head and it becomes a, I can't do this. My lines are always thick and fat. What am I doing wrong? So today we're going to talk about the two most important things that you need to do in order to make good line work. First thing is your paint needs to be the right consistency, and the second thing is you need to practice more than you ever thought you needed to. So one thing's easy to do, one thing just takes more time. All right, so let's talk about paint consistency. I'm using Folk Art matte acrylic paints, and they come out of the bottle and they are a great, nice, rich, creamy consistency, perfect for all sorts of painting effects. What it's not good for is using your liner brush. This paint, let me just go ahead and show you this in kind of a comical way, but this is often, what happens. You pick up some paint on your liner brush. This is just right out of the bottle, and you want to make a thin line with this, but here's what happens. This paint is not thin enough to flow off of my liner brush. The paint's on the brush, but it won't come off easily, and that's because the paint isn't the right consistency. So I'm going to thin my paint down with water, which is what I think is probably the easiest and best medium to use to thin acrylic paint down for line work. So we're adding it using our palette knife, and we're thoroughly mixing it in to our puddle of paint. And we're doing this, and I'm sure we're letting people join us because people are always coming in and out of our live stream, so we'll give people a chance to find us and tune in while we're just thinning our paint down. And you don't really have to get this paint perfectly the right consistency with your palette knife. The goal here is to thin that paint way down. All right, Stephen, so do we have any questions yet or any comments about using your liner brush?
No questions so far, but yeah, guys, let us know if you have any questions for Andy, and I would be happy to relay those to him, and he will answer them to the best of his ability.
Yes. All right, so I have taken my wet liner brush and I'm thinning this paint down just at the edge of my puddle of paint. And this is where I need to make sure everything is the right consistency. So I want to make sure that this paint is very, very thin. Think about it as if you had poured a little milk on your palette. That's about the consistency that you want. And we're going to load our brush full of paint. I am pressing the brush into this puddle of paint, and when I lift the brush up, the capillary action of having the bristles spread out, and when they contract, they pull the paint up into the brush, which is exactly what you want that brush, full of paint. Now then, once you have your brush full of paint, we need to check something. So to make sure that we don't have a problem, I fold my shop towel over so I've got a nice crisp edge, and I set the brush right where the bristles join the ferrule, that's the metal part of the brush, and I blot right there so that if I have any excess water on the ferrule of the brush or any excess in the bristles of the brush, touching it right along that edge kind of pulls everything out. You can see right there where I've just pulled that little bit of paint out. So you can see right there. Always a good thing to do when you're painting. So I will usually end up with like a paper towel like this so that I can just touch right there as I'm working. All right, now my brush is full of paint and it's pretty thin, but I want to make sure that the tip of the bristle is ready to go. So I'm going to turn the brush in my fingers as I drag it out, and now my brush has a very, very fine point. So paint consistency number one. Now I can give you pointers on how to get your paint that thin which we've done by adding water to the paint, with a palette knife to loosen up the puddle of paint, then with the brush to make sure that it's really thin. The second part is practicing, and that's something you just have to make time for. So we're going to hold our brush with the handle pointed up toward the ceiling, and we're going to touch the brush to the surface, just the tip of the brush, and we're going to touch and we're going to pull using a light, even pressure on the brush, and we will create a very fine, thin, controlled line. And I am resting my hand on the work surface to steady myself and to make it easier to control the pressure on the brush.
So Andy, we have a question here.
Okay.
Any tips on how to get a very thin, even line with the liner? I can't seem to get a super thin line without it being broken, even when my paint is very, very thin.
Okay, nobody's going to like this answer. It's practice. You have to be able to, and I'll show you that you can create a very thin, even line with the liner brush. So twist it to a point. So I've got a nice point on my liner brush. I'm also using a script liner, which has longer bristles than a traditional liner brush, and it holds more paint, and it's easier for me to use than a regular liner brush. But you're going to hold that brush in your hand and rest, like the flat part of your hand here, that's resting on the table, so I can control the amount of pressure that I'm putting on the brush. So I'm going to try to do this with a little bit of a tilt to the brush so you can see. That's where I'm putting it down, and I can hold my hand right there. Don't have to move, don't have to do anything. It's just going to make a dot. But that's all the pressure I need right there. So when you're holding your brush with the handle pointed up, resting your hand on the surface, you can touch the brush to the surface and then maintain that pressure, and you can pull a very nice, long, thin, even line. What I'm not doing is doing this super, super fast. I'm giving paint time to run down the bristles and off the tip of the brush. And I can do it back the other way. Touch, set the brush down, pull, 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 nice even pressure, and you create another nice, long, thin line. It's maintaining the even pressure on the brush, which will give you this nice, thin, fine line. So I hope that helps a little bit. And keep in mind, I've been teaching people how to paint for almost 40 years. So I've had a lot of time to practice this. And when you are learning to do it, there's going to be a lot of lines that are not what you want. But again, it's simply a matter of putting your hand down on your surface, touching the brush to the surface using almost no pressure, and then a nice even pull. You don't want to do this super fast. You want to give the paint time to flow from the bristles down to the surface. All right, so are there any other questions about how we're doing this, Stephen?
No questions as of right now. I think we're good.
Okay, so let's talk about doing some other things. This is basically really how you want to use your liner brush. So we're going to make sure we've got a nice little puddle of very thin paint. We're going to twist our brush to a nice fine point, and then we can do a series of lines that are parallel to each other, and then we can do them perpendicular to each other. This is called cross-hatching. So you can create little lines like that. We can also do things like if we're painting a landscape and we've got some grasses, we can use our liner brush and we can paint a series of little fine lines that would indicate a mound of grass. Just adding some dots there for interest there. But so you've got some grasses painted there, and the grasses, some can be long, they can cross over each other. You can, create different lengths of grasses. You've got to make your grass look interesting, and so crossing some of those over, having varied heights there, all makes your grass much more interesting. You could do little tendrils with your brush, creating little swoops that are like M's and W's. So let's show how we can do that. Touch the brush down, and as we move the brush around, we give the bristles time to keep up with us. So this is not something that's done super fast. So you could do curled lines like that. If you try to do it too fast, and I'm not sure I'm going to be able to make this mess up, but oftentimes you'll get like a weird little thing that happens in this area of a loop. So you'll do, there you go. This little thing here is where the brush didn't have time to follow around, and so it just kind of flicked itself out as it came around. But we can load up our liner brush and do a really big curlicue to show you just how much paint you can fit in your liner brush. So let's just see how much line we can paint with one brush load of paint. So we're going to start over here and we're going to make a series of loops, and then we're going to change direction. We're going to make some more loops that way and then change direction again and come back down and change direction and go back up and change direction. What I'm not doing is changing the amount of pressure that I'm putting on this liner brush, just letting the brush follow around so that it has time to create the series of loops. And I'm starting to, well, I'm running out of paper, but I'm starting to run out of paint. But a well-loaded liner brush can do quite a long line before you start to run out of paint. So again, main takeaways from today's lesson. You want to make sure that you have your paint very, very thin. That's crucial. And the other crucial thing to getting good with using your liner brush is to practice, practice, practice. And there's nothing better than to take a little leftover paint after you've been working on something, thin it out, load your liner brush up, and you can just on a scrap piece of paper start making little curlicues and just keep going till you get it. And once you've realized that you can control the amount of pressure, you're going to be well on your way to making lots of beautiful, thin, fine lines, any length you need to make them. All right, so any last minute questions, Stephen?
No last minute questions.
Okay, so I hope this was helpful to you. Again, the main thing you need to do is to spend some time practicing. So thin paint, practice, very little pressure, and you don't have to do everything fast. You can make a nice slow line. That gives you more control. So I want you in control of the brush, not the brush in control of you. So practice up, and we'll see you next time.